Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Yes.
Well, we're going to clean up a mess. The EPA is supposed to protect us. Looks like they haven't been doing a very good job, and they've been in the news lately. But they assure us that they will have an investigation and check up on this and act responsibly and assume the responsibility. I think the odds are pretty slim that they will assume the responsibility like if it would have happened with a private company and they weren't responsible. But they said they're responsible. But you know, in a way, they're responsible by paying for this, demanding more money, taking more money from us, the taxpayers, and probably writing more regulations. So I'm not all that optimistic. I was never a fan of the EPA, but I'm not feeling sorry for them right now.
Yeah, this is an absolute disaster. I'm sure everyone has seen the pictures of this horrific orange.
Right.
Looks like they dumped orange juice in the river. Unfortunately, it's not as tasty as orange juice. The Gold King mine in southern Colorado, just a couple of numbers that I got from a CNN article, 3 million gallons of heavy metal-filled wastewater made it into the river. 12,000 times, the lead content is 12,000 times higher than normal. 3 states affected. 45,000 people, they get their water from this river, generally speaking, and they'll be running out of water soon. But, as you pointed out, the EPA said things are on the mend now. The readings are normal, so would you have a drink out of that, Rivers?
Well, the principle is so bad that they're going to protect us. But more back to the details, there was one individual that commented on this before it happened. Yeah. And evidently he has a few credentials on knowing something about this, and he said, watch out, there's a problem out there. Could you tell us about that?
That was interesting. It was a story that Zero Hedge ran, which I know we both enjoy reading quite a bit. This is a retired geologist who was familiar with the EPA's operations trying to clean up these mines, and he warned a couple of weeks ago that the EPA is going to have a massive spill on this river, and they're going to use it as an excuse to demand a new wastewater treatment facility there under the Superfund. It sounds pretty crazy, but what he said is exactly what happened.
Well, I know. He predicted it. I don't know. And in the way this country goes, maybe they will respond to rewarding a company, an agency that really fouls up and give them more money and thinking that they can correct it. I don't know what year the Superfund came into being, but I remember voting on it, and there weren't too many people, I imagine, that voted against it. I voted against it on the principle that damage to property is not a collective problem. So it's always the taxpayers that has to get bailed out, and it should be always the property owner. You get into more difficulty with bankruptcies and things like that. But this idea that we have to have an agency to protect us, I just don't like the idea of government protecting us from ourselves or protecting our property, and we end up with FEMA and flood insurance and all these other things that go haywire. But it's been there. Nixon started in 1970, and it's to protect us. But you know, I was raised in a city that was probably one of the most polluted cities ever in the country, and that was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in industrialization, World War II, and this sort of thing, and a lot of steel, a lot of productivity, but we couldn't see the sun until noontime sometimes. The rivers were sewers, and guess what? It got cleaned up. But it was cleaned up on the principle that there's some local responsibility, and it was done with local regulation. So it's not like if we didn't have the EPA, there would be no hope for it. But I think the basic libertarian principle is nobody has a right to pollute. Sometimes I see the EPA manipulating, believe it or not, the regulations to benefit some people, you know, where you can buy permits and you can pollute a little here if you don't pollute over here. So big companies are able to manage things better. The hypocrisy in this whole thing, when you look at the Al Gores of the world who pretend they're going to clean up the air and the CO2, and they're the biggest polluters ever. So I'm not very happy with this process, and I'll be less happy if it's used to expand EPA rather than calling it to task and cutting back and looking at this from a property rights issue.
And don't forget the revolving door between the regulators at EPA and the corporate, the nice corporate jobs.
That's fine. You know, that's right, and that happens everywhere, whether it's in the banking industry or the drug industry and the FDA. It's back and forth. It's corporatism at its worst, and it is involved here. So to me, it's a real shame that people succumb because they see the problem and somebody comes and they'll say they'll take care of it. But the biggest argument that we have that they put on against us is the fact that it wouldn't work. But if companies can get permission from the government, and that was more or less what happened in the Industrial Revolution in Pittsburgh, is the courts wouldn't close them down. The air was polluted, the water was polluted, and they weren't called to task. So instead of saying, look, you don't have a right to do it, I think the environment would be better with private owners recognizing you can't pollute your neighbor's air, you can't pollute your neighbor's water, and you aren't allowed to because you're violating a property right. And that's what is lost. Now it turns over, well, if the government's responsible for protecting the property, maybe they own the property. And of course we found out in looking at this that if you don't go along with the EPA, you might end up in jail.
And I know what you've talked about a lot as a former legislator is that the EPA takes the existing law and then they radically expand it through almost like pseudo laws called regulations.
Right, and they will do things that they weren't explicitly given authority to do, so they expand the scope that they can do. But first, the regulation shouldn't have been written, and allowing them, the law shouldn't have been written. Then they shouldn't be allowed to write these regulations because they are laws. But then when they do these things, does Congress ever react? I think in the whole time I was there, I think there was one outrageous issue that was rescinded, because Congress has the right to rescind the regulation, but they essentially never do it. They just are apathetic about it, and they just let it go because, they might. She says that she's very sorry, and they are studying it very carefully, and they're going to correct this. Of course, it's not the way they would treat, a private owner. I mean, they'd be probably hauled off in handcuffs by now. But I think it's a story to show that people should never be dependent on government per se to take care of us and protect us. It's better to do it locally than nationally. I think a comparison to this would be FEMA, how FEMA protects us from flooding. And all they do is take over property rights, and the owners can't take care of their own property. And of course, in that case, it's the insurance that encourages people to do dumb things. And in this, in a way, it gives some companies cover. Well, the EPA's in there, and they're taking care of it, and they have the regulations, and they get away with things. So I've always seen the FEMA, once again, as an attack on the principle of private property. And I believe that economic liberty is protected by private property, but I also think civil liberties are protected by property. Our right to come to this studio and talk about it, it's this right to be secure in this building that allows us to do this. So property is so important in the protection of liberty, whether it's civil liberties or whether it is economic liberty. And of course, I would like to see it applied to internationally as well, that we don't have the right to interfere with property management outside our own realm, especially since we don't do a very good job here. Yeah. And in my lifetime, the principle of private property has been severely undermined.
I think there is this misconception that under a libertarian society, if there ever was one, it would be everyone could pollute willy-nilly, the place would turn into an uninhabitable planet, and it's such a misconception. I think you've addressed that here with the issue of property rights.
Well, and others will say, Ron, that's too bad, you're going to close them down. But what are you going to do with those 15,000 employees? They're going to be unemployed. Oh, wouldn't that be sad? Maybe they should go and work for McDonald's or somebody else. I mean, and do productive work instead of this thing. And I imagine in that 15,000, I bet a lot of them are making good money. I bet there's a lot of them that are way above the average wage. That's generally the case in fancy retirement funds. So if they could claim that they have done a perfect job, it'd be a different story, but that's not going to happen. The bureaucracy always fails, and they will always downplay the fact that there could be a private market solution to these problems. And in this case, I argue that it could probably be a lot better rather than permitting corporations to get away with it, which they were able to do, you know, in the early history in the Industrial Revolution, because there was no control at all. And then they had to say, well, government is the solution. Well, the government is the solution if the government is there to protect private property and get out of the way of interfering with our rights and interfering with our right to own property. We shouldn't have an agency of government which is arbitrary, which licenses, and then without due process of law taking property from people and actually putting people in prison because they covered over a pothole or something, improve their land, improve the environment, and they can be found guilty of some vicious federal crime, and the EPA agents come. They are the police. They come with guns. It's part of the militarization of the local police, which has been sort of indoctrinated by federal standards. We have too many police, and they say we need them because we have to enforce the law. Right. That means we have too many laws. And the sooner we realize that, whether they're drug laws or environmental laws, we can solve these problems in a much different fashion. That's what liberty is all about. I hope you all join the cause of liberty and promote it, because that will be the answer to what we face today in this country with the continued challenge to our personal liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.